Richard, I think there's a mic now coming.
Wow.
So advanced.
You mentioned a few of these, but can you all think of any other common mistakes that directors make in communication with you?
I don't think that there are necessarily mistakes, as long as there is I mean, it's always, every single director, composer relationship is, I mean, the only mistake is not communicating, you know, to think that the composer is going to get to it his or herself. Because every relationship is created in the room, or whatever, if the room is Skype, you know, whatever. The only mistake is thinking you should wait to communicate. Because I think a good film composer is trying to reflect the subjective, intuitive vision of the composer. And the only way to find out what that is any means of communication you can possibly come up with.
I think the biggest mistake you can make is not being honest. As much as you think it's going to hurt, we can take it. We've been doing this for years. I'll tell you some horror stories of dishonesty and honesty. Jerry Bruckheimer, I played a cue for him one time, and in the middle of it, he said, "That sucks, what else you got?" And that hurts, because that's really blunt, but it was really honest. And it didn't allow me to travel down that road any further. And in the dishonesty camp, I had a director sit on my couch at my home and say, "Oh, it's wonderful, I love it, this is great, keep doing what you're doing." Got in his car, by hugs, drove down the street, my agent called and said, "Why are you suddenly fired from the project?" But you guys were very honest. I remember playing a cue and sweet about it too. You let this entire 4-minute cue play, and I turned around and you just went. "Okay," and then you said, "We're sorry," and so honesty is very important to us.
I think another mistake is a kind of a mistake is if when you temp your film, you want to keep in mind the budget that the person's going to have to use it. You know, you don't want to, use a 100-piece orchestra and a 50-piece chorus for a film that has a $20,000 budget from music. So I think you have to be mindful of what the person's going to actually have to work with.
That's a mistake that the director I've worked with named David Wayne often makes. Pretty much every movie. Oh, you figured it out. It's actually my fault, it turns out. Like, all right, man, I'm gonna do it, then you'll see. And I have to do it again the next year.
I think one mistake or one perspective is often I hear filmmakers that want to talk in the language of the composers. And I think in the end it's about the movie, and every film composer knows about movies, so it's more about talking about the movie than about how to compose that music, because we're going to find the solution, I guess.
I have a question about that though. Sometimes you're directing an actor and you want to say, hey, this is where I think the scenes are. How about if you're trying to do this? Then occasionally an actor will be like, just tell me how you want me to say the line. And you're like, oh, I don't want to give a line reading. Please, I want to hear what you're seeing in your head and you're avoiding saying, and then they want the line reading. Is there an equivalent to that in a composer where you're like, I know you're hearing something in your head, why don't you just tell me, why don't you just sing for me what you're hearing? Or,
Sometimes that's what good temp does. Like this is what I'm hearing, and then you have a conversation about like what we were all just discussing, like which elements are what you're hearing, which strands of the temp.
Right. I mean, you can't really be a film composer and be precious about that kind of stuff. I mean, we had a lot of things where he's like, that note should go up and the one before should go down. And actually, I think that's cool. I mean, I like that kind of thing. It makes me think of
Todd
things
was
I wouldn't have.
really tolerant. I think
Yeah,
we were
very
really tolerant. I think because there were a lot of times I were in there and I felt like, first of all, there were several moments where David, me, and Ross felt 3 different things. Like Todd would play a new cue, and then we'd say who goes first, and we'd take turns, and then somebody would be like, I like the middle, and we'll kind of go, and then Ross would be like, I like the end, and Dave would say, I want to hear it again, And Todd was just really cool with that, which blew my mind. And then there were times where we would do the line read thing, and that was where I thought, like, Todd's gonna just like quit, Like Ross, I'm just gonna make fun of Ross. He can take it. Ross would say like do 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 do, do things like that. And I would just wait for Todd to just like explode or throw something, and Todd would be like, Okay?
Kate,
You know,
Kate, you should get paid for apologizing for me.
no, I'm not apologizing for it, but I'm just saying, like, if, you know, we would get to these points where we were just like pushing the edges of our ability to communicate through sleep deprivation to Todd about what we wanted, and we would stoop to these levels, which I think weren't really constructive. But I mean, I guess what's interesting about this, hearing everybody talk, is I think, you know, I do think music composers are very open, creative people as a bunch, and that, you know, sometimes, you know, when we're working with as directors, when we're working with other people, producers or certain others who are a little more rigid, you know, you can't get away with that, but I think we can sometimes communicate badly and it's still okay in the music realm, which is a relief.
I mean, this is collaborative, right? This is a collaborative art. And you have to be open to that collaboration. And I think a job as directors, our job is to bring in people that we feel are collaborative. And sometimes people aren't, and it's really difficult.
And I do think that directing is all about being very general and then being specific when needed at times. And that's with the DP, with the actor, with everybody. It's just.
I really appreciate it when directors they're so into what they're doing that they actually know, you know, why music should be doing what it should be doing. And I reminded of that my Michael Mann experience. You know, I'd hand the music in and we'd get, you know, this email, this long email. And when I saw that email, I would just freak out. You know, my heart's pounding. You know, I wanted to know, you know, how did I screw up this time? And but in that email, you know, he was brilliant. He would say, no, you're supposed to be playing the subtext in the scene, not what you're seeing on the screen. And then he'd be very complimentary. And then he'd say, and what the next paragraph would be, does the composer even understand what the scene's about? He was very direct, very blunt, and it was great. And in the end, it all worked out. It was fabulous. But he was a very musical director, and he knew what he wanted, and he didn't sort of have to see he was never the type where, you know, you throw paint on the wall and see what works. He was never an accidental, he never was the type of composer that knew what he liked when he heard it. He already knew what he wanted before he heard it. So it was a unique experience.
And filmmaker, I mean, it's a collaboration, but it's not a collaboration among equals. There's the director, and as collaborators, everyone else who's working on the film is trying to bring their voice in service of the director's voice. And I think that's what makes a good film composer. And if you don't have that joy from doing that, it's not going to be fun.
Yes.
G'day, my name is Cactus Jack. I'm from Australia. And first of all, Catherine, wonderful, thank you. And is it Mark Orton? Yeah, Nebraska. I love it. I've just seen those two movies. And Mr. Keeley, is that right? Blake Neely, I'm sorry. I only watched The Mentalist because of your music, so well done.
Thank you very much.
Okay, 3 years ago I had a life-changing event and I decided to sell everything that I own and come to America and become a Hollywood composer. How do I get from where I'm standing right now to where you guys are sitting? And if there are any directors that are out here that want to take a risk on an unknown,
Take 10 steps
see me at,
forward.
yeah.
It starts with one Q&A.
Excellent. Well, I've not taken no for an answer.
Honestly, look into the Sundance Composer Lab.
Okay.
I'd say not to push Sundance, but literally it has put how many
Let's push
us on the stage. So that's a good place to start.
I mean, Peter, I learned so much in that first documented composer lab. I went there thinking I knew something, and I didn't know anything. And it was wonderful to discover how much I didn't know. So thank you.
Do you have friends, sort of friends who are directors or aspiring directors or writers who you can sort of team up with?
Do I look like the kind of guy who actually has friends? No. No, literally, I came over here with no contacts. I did manage to get a 7-record deal with Deseret Book, just on the strength of some of my compositions and arrangements, and trying to shoehorn that into the motion picture industry. But I mean, I'm here today by asking questions and paying attention to the industry. But I really need that next step to someone to say, yeah, we like this, or is there some formula? Yes.
Well, there's no formula, but you could start by joining the Society of Composers and Lyricists in Los Angeles, because it'll hook you into other composers working all over the world, but primarily in New York and Los Angeles, and they have tons of activities, seminars, screenings, one-on-ones. You'll meet a lot of people that are working composers. The website is thescl.org.
The SCL?
Yes, Society of Composers and Lyricists.
Okay, SCL. Thank you very much.
SCL.org.
Great. We have time for maybe one more question. Who's got a burning one? Ready, pick one that's burning back there.
This is for the directors. I was just wondering, before you meet with the composer, what's your process of deciding what you're going to say to them? How do you decide what you want the musical language of your film to be, and how do you sort of prep for that first meeting?
You get really drunk the night before, and you get really hungover that morning.
Well, for me, it was the same as, you know, any other, I guess, department head, you know, cinematographer or production designer. You know, I send them the script, and then they read the script, and then we have a conversation that is solely based on the story. So, like, you know, that's what I knew, and that was the approach I took with Mark, was send him the script, and then we had like several conversations over the course of several days. That was sort of our jumping off point.
That's my approach too, but I think one part of the way I sort of try to articulate it is to start with language that's kind of the opposite of what you might first expect. I kind of think that's an interesting way of looking at music anyway, sort of initially counterpoint what you're thinking. You may not live with that, but it's an interesting way of kind of jogging you out of something that's typical.
There are some specific things you can do to prepare before you meet composers. I mean, first of all, if there's people that you're interested in, you should check out their work, and most of it's available on the internet now, in websites. So you'd actually be familiar with them and have a point of departure for the conversation. I also think that directors can spend a day or two experimenting, throw some cues up from any other soundtracks, and just get a sense of what kind of universe, you want to begin your discussions about the kind of style of the score, the instrumentation, or maybe some composers whose work you like, or even film. Think about films you've seen where you really like the way the music's working, so that you actually can come into the conversation with something to say, something to offer. You can also find out more about their thoughts too. Maybe sit down and watch a little piece of your film and see how they respond. That'll tell you a lot about what the collaboration might be like. So there's many, many proactive things you can do to prepare so that you don't feel helpless.
Did you prepare for our meeting?
Yeah, I mean, I think we sent you the DVD and you watched it and we had lunch, and I think just knowing that you understood the emotion and what we wanted out of the score in terms of, parts of it would be big and not too big, and knowing, where the heart is and where, to pull back a little bit. I think in the first conversation, you just nailed all of that, and we were immediately like, wow, we just gel with this guy.
And then, I don't know if this is too nitty-gritty of an answer for you, but once we hired Blake, once we actually jumped into it, we actually created a music cue sheet for you too, outlining our whole film and where we thought cues belonged. Helen, our associate editor, is back there. She created that for us. I don't know how much you used it, but it was really nerdy of us. But we had sort of it all outlined on where we saw music going and sort of what that mood might be. And if there was a temp track in there, I think there was even a link to it. So that was super nerdy and organized. But I don't know, you can tell us if you use that or not.
No, that was great.
Okay.
Because I didn't have a music editor, or I was just, it helped me go through it. But also the first meeting, we just kind of got to know each other. We spent like a 2-hour lunch, because it's really important to know, for you guys to know, I mean, is this guy too freaking weird for us to be in a room with him for the next 2 months? And do we like these? Do we all like each other?
Well, and we were making a documentary about something that was very important to us, and we knew would be very important to part of the world at least. And so Blake's passion sold us a lot too on the issue. And he's not even gay, his wife is right here. And we just assumed he was gay because he sent us an email right away saying, I have to do this film. And he wasn't gay.
A lot of people just assume I'm gay.
It took us like an hour to the lunch to figure out when he said the word wife, and we were like, wow, he just became more interesting to us. But find someone, I think, who is so passionate about the message of your film, because Blake has worked his ass off for
not enough money and has worked around the clock, and I know he's worked way harder than what we paid him for, and I think that's because he really believed in the message of the film, and it's been really amazing to actually get to show the film and watch people react to the music. Thank you.
We have 5 minutes left, but sit down. What I would like to end on is just having everybody up there give a quick piece of advice. If you're speaking to a developing filmmaker or developing composer who may be in the room, what piece of advice would you give them briefly? Start with you.
Really, I mean, as far as working with a composer as a director, I really just, it's just like, they were talking about casting, and, I've done narrative work, and I've now done a documentary, and it's just so important to be able to communicate, and, it's like, do you like hanging out with that person? Because you're gonna have to develop a shorthand with them. No matter if you're far away from them or in the room, you're gonna have to develop a shorthand, and you really have to just be able to get along, obviously you like their work, but you have to be able to communicate with that person, because, you work with people very closely on something that's really close to your heart, and you have to enjoy it, I think. I would rather not enjoy it, so that's my advice.
Way back at the lab, I think it was Carter Burwell said something that sounds very simple, which was have fun. At the time I didn't get it. It was like, I gotta torture myself. I have to stay up 40 hours in a row, it's like, but I don't know if it's having kids or what, but it's like, it's a real honor to be able to give a part of yourself to emote and help tell someone else's story. And I found that when I take a step back and go for a walk and think about enjoying the process and having fun, the music ends up a lot better.
What I think I really learned in this last cooperation is that you can really trust the process, that it's not just about the first meeting, and if the first meeting doesn't click, you're doomed or so, but that you can trust the process, or even if you give the wrong advice or you use the wrong terms, it's not the end of everything. It's just like one path you took, and you can just find something else. You can try to find another way to communicate, and maybe for this one cue you have to still find another way, and for this it will be temp tracks, and for this it will just be like a word describing the emotion or so, but you can like trust the process. And the second thing is, just really because of this love for temp tracks, what I found out what helped me is to not jump to a decision too quickly, but to take back the new score back to the editing room, and to do the same thing you did with the temp track, basically. So you put it there, just play around with it, you maybe cut something else, you just move it to the left, to the right, so you also get used to it. And that's where you either see that it now works, and now you're used to that new music, or if it still doesn't work, you maybe then know that you definitely something has to change.
I was going to say the same thing as you about the temp track music. Like, if the composer writes something that's really different than the temp music, don't just write it off the first time you listen to it, because there was actually a scene, Todd wrote a different piece of music for one scene that had worked a certain way, and this is the Anya and the red light being frustrated, and the cue Todd wrote, it made the scene play totally differently, and at first we were like, well, or I was like, well, and not that I didn't like it, but I was like, the movie's different, how do you change the movie? And so I had to listen to that like 4 times, and I was like, oh my God, it's so much better. But it can take a minute.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I wanted to talk about that cue this whole time. No, Todd, it's great when you're open. You have to be open, right? And so this one cue, the scene was it was feeling sad for our characters, and it was just driving me nuts for about, I don't know, 8 months. And then Todd came in, and we really worked on it hard. And then at a certain point, remember, David, we were in the room, and we were all right, let's hear it. We're down to the wire, I think.
We were a little past the wire.
You were past the wire. And Todd played it, and I was like, I got up and I started like, that's so great. It totally changed the scene. And it made it so much more important to the film, and it sort of saved it. My only advice is just to be open and leave your ego at the door, and be willing to be wrong a lot of the time.
Yeah, for composers, be open, be fast, and know that if you had a good idea, you've got another one. Get ready to throw it out, because you can't get attached to things. It has to be more like I say it has to be more like ping pong than chess. You really have to throw ideas back and forth and be able to communicate them as quickly as possible.
I would say for filmmakers to plan ahead. I think that we probably waited till way too late in the game, and I don't think not everybody gets as lucky as we did with Blake, but you get so caught up in the filmmaking process and you have all these big ideas in your head of what you want the score and the soundtrack to be like, and then you find yourself with 3 months before your premiere and you're like, oh shit, what do we do? So just, I would say, keep that in mind in the development of the film, actually, planning that ahead.
My advice to any aspiring composer who wants to get into film composing is an exercise I've told students to do, and that I still do, is stay up writing until 2 in the morning, something that you really like and you're really proud of, and leave it open on your computer, and when you get up the next morning, highlight all and delete and throw it in the trash. Because it's literally will get you prepared for what you have to do. I do it all the time. That's not cynicism either. I mean, it really happens. And empty the trash so you can't get it back.
Just a tip for composers, and I guess especially young composers, but I've just sort of realized the pattern here. Blake sent us an unsolicited email when he heard about our project, and we ended up hiring him. The last 2 films I made that had much smaller budgets than this film, I also hired composers who had heard about the subject matter of my film, young composers who emailed me, and I was a young director. And my last film, I think at least 5 or 6 young composers emailed me when they'd heard about my film, and I ended up hiring one of them as well. And he didn't make much money, and you know, we worked really hard on it, but he's gotten a lot of projects out of that film. So just send unsolicited emails if you're interested in the subject matter.
Well, I guess I'll take it a little different direction. I think it's really important that you don't go into any career, whether it's a filmmaker or a composer, thinking that there's a way that you're supposed to be. I think you have to work hard to develop your own voice, and the longer I do this, the more I realize I'm just pushing who I am, whatever makes me individual, whatever makes my music sound like my music. And that's what seems to have led to more success, rather than trying to fit into some mold or be another Ennio Morricone, not that I could, but you know, things like that. So, you know, develop your own voice and be proud of it. Peter?
Well, many people have said what I was thinking, but I like to return to that feeling I get when I first start a movie. There's just a sense of wonder and magic about what happens when you put music to an image and you're just playing around. And you know, as you get into the process and you're trying to hit deadlines and please people, you kind of get far away from that. I think just stay true to that. Have fun and that sense of wonder about the magic that happens when you put music to film and it works.
I guess I would go back to your question about up-and-coming composers. I live in Portland. I never moved to LA. I never got an apprenticeship. I would say the way I've gone about it is just by hoofing it to festivals, by meeting directors that I like. Some of them are still in film school, by being willing to demo for them, and honestly being willing, unfortunately, to work for not much money or nothing.
Got that down. Yeah.
Yeah, and anyway, that's the way that I cut my way into it.
Yeah, I would say, I think somebody said this earlier, but just being open to the process and being open to collaboration. You know, specifically with this film, towards the end of the movie, there's a bunch of emotional beats that happen one after another, and in my temp score, it was like we need music, and Mark came up and said, there are places where you don't need anything at all, and like my knee-jerk reaction was like, you're crazy, like we have to have music, that's how you get emotion across. But after I sort of went home and slept with it and everything, it was like, he's right, and there's one scene, I'm thinking about the kitchen where they make the tortillas and stuff, and that scene is completely dry. I think there's like a sound of like gas coming from the stove top or something. But at a screening last night, there was a lot of sniffles in the crowd, and I feel like that scene is so much powerful because I was able to shut up and listen to Mark.
Yeah, I'll definitely co-sign the being open thing. I mean, it is really hard to sort of like say goodbye to your temp score and sort of leave and mourn, the old ideas that you had. particularly for me, because I'm thinking about music as I'm writing the script, you know, already. And I would just tack on to that is to be honest. I mean, even if telling the truth is saying something like, I have no idea what I want, or I have no idea why this doesn't work, or this doesn't work, or you were right, this is amazing. Just being willing to just constantly communicate what you're thinking and feeling, and being open to the collaboration.
I think that, again, it's relationships, and I think, am I here? Okay. I think that, you know, everybody has such a different path in terms of how their careers unfold. So it's really hard to talk about it in specifics, and I just go back to the whole importance of the relationships you have, and developing relationships with upcoming filmmakers who really do have that career filmmaking path as something that's important to them, and just talking also to friends who are in the film industry, your actor friends, your editor friends, just saying, you know, I'm really wanting to do more film scoring. Are you working on something that maybe I can submit some ideas to, or meet the director? I mean, it's really about just taking initiatives. It's a very organic thing. And then in terms of getting the gig, and once you get started, for me, it's really about the openness that there's that moment where you're both just starting, as Peter said, and you're coming with an idea and you're presenting it, and you just have to really cherish that moment and the energy of that moment, and then just trust, really building that trust in the way you communicate, as Justin was saying. You know, when he didn't like something, or when something didn't quite appeal to him, he was very gracious about it, but I still got the message, it's just not working. So you're there to figure that out, but not necessarily beat yourself up about it. Just, it's a very, very organic kind of a process, and just be self-forgiving in that process.
You know, regardless of the temp score or the spotting session or, you know, the conversations, I think it's kind of the job of the composer to surprise the filmmaker at some point, you know, with what he does. And I think that if the filmmaker or the director can, if that happens, and you're receptive to that, then you've got a true collaboration. I think it's a good deal.
I guess my advice is an advice for myself as well, which I follow, is really to set a goal for the collaboration. And it can be very different on every movie. If you want another layer in the music that has not been there before the score was composed, which you didn't have in temp track. So to really ask yourself what you want the music to achieve in the movie, and then you can finally test it, if you achieve that together or not.
You know, the director-composer collaboration is so special and so important for a film. I mean, there is magic in the right combination between images and music. And I think to find the person that can kind of help you get that magical mix and do it in lots of different ways and for lots of different meanings is really great. I mean, there are great, amazing, talented composers, and then, you know, there are amazing, great, talented composers that work with the kind of things that you care and are passionate about. So that finding that connection is really valuable.
I think,
which is what I did with him.
well, I feel very lucky, you know, working with Brian, but I think working on projects that you really like and are excited about, because there's nothing worse when you're working on something and you're watching it and you're cringing. And, so I don't know, that to me, and you don't always have that choice, but that's what I'd like.
I agree with everything everyone said.
If, for composers, or anyway, if you feel like you're just making sausages, adjust your course. You're probably not that far from making something that you love. And if your intention is to, as much as possible, make music that you love, it will eventually find a home, even if it's not right for the thing that you're working on. Develop a meditation practice, and deal with all of your relationships outside of music and movies. It will improve your music and lead you to your authentic voice.
That's great.
Thank you, Doreen.
And thank you. I wanted to thank all of the staff staff at BMI who are here working really hard to put this on, as well as all the Sundance staff that are killing themselves to do this. And thank our